doing business in India is extremely hard, especially if you are a small business, because India is a very cost-sensitive market. Usually what happens when you take interviews of a lot of freshers, right? I mean, you instantly know like they're pretending they're good coders, but they're not really good coders.
What was your first encounter with the term open source, and why did you think it was important to delve into it?
Unfortunately, a lot of this advice gets given to people, especially young people, right? Go and contribute to open source. No, you shouldn't do that. For many years, there was only one company that actually made money by giving away software free, that was Red Hat. We also have something we call as pick your own pay. I think we are the only company in India probably that does it. You just say that this is the pay I want. Yes, that's how
does that work? Hi Rushabh, welcome to the Fueled Unfiltered. So glad to have you here. How are you doing?
Thanks Pooja. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great on a Monday morning.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Rushabh, so for somebody who doesn't know what you do, could you give a short blitz introduction about your career trajectory and your personal life a little bit?
I am born and brought up in Mumbai. Did engineering, production engineering in 2001. I graduated in 2001.
What's production engineering?
Production engineering is essentially how to make things, manufacturing things, machines, and it's like mechanical engineering, but more geared towards manufacturing things. So that's production engineering. And I'm also a hobbyist programmer since childhood. By some luck, I had a computer in my house since 1990. So I've always been a hobbyist programmer. And after doing my engineering, I did a master's in the US for a couple of years. Post 9/11, very bad time to get jobs. So had to come back, and also had a family business. So I joined that for a bit. And then we struggling from an ERP implementation. ERP system is essentially an accounting system. And the company was having a very archaic accounting system. And then that's how I started building my own accounting system. And that became a full-time thing in 2008.
So you're talking about ERPNext, right? And ERPNext comes under Frappe?
Yeah, Frappe is the name of the company. ERPNext is a product.
Yeah, and I think you have multiple products under Frappe.
Yeah, so now we've launched a bunch of products under Frappe as well.
Would you like to talk about FOSS United as well? Because you founded FOSS United in 2017, if I'm not wrong.
I mean, FOSS United came just before COVID. So when we published ERPNext as an open source project, this was way back in 2008. I mean, there was no so the way open source projects are built is that people share their code online, and then other people then look at the code and start contributing. And there is usually a community, but there was no community in India happening. Mm-hmm. So we've always been looking to build to go and meet other open source developers in India, which was not happening at all. And then we finally decided we'll do our own nonprofit. We call it ERPNext Foundation in 2016. So Zerodha became which is now one of the largest brokers and one of the celebrated startups in India. They started adopting ERPNext in 2016 and got to know the team quite well. So just over a casual conversation with Kailash, who is the CTO at Zerodha, that let's do something for open source. And we started off with an event. We called it India OS in 2020. This is Feb 2020, just before COVID. And we thought maybe 50 people will show up, but 150 people showed up. And it was there was so much energy in that event that we realized that, okay, there is this opportunity to start, there is clearly an opportunity for an open source community organization in India. And that's how FOSS United took birth just before COVID in 2020.
For the audience, the topics that we're going to dive into in this podcast are going to be communities, open source, and some of your startups as well. Mm-hmm. So I want to start with open source. So before 2008, you were an engineer and you were involved in your family business. Mm-hmm. So what was your first encounter with the term open source, and why did you think it was important to delve into it?
So I heard open source much earlier, actually. I mean, everybody's heard of Linux as well, right? So while I knew about Linux, I had no real connection to open source communities or open source softwares. It was until I looked into Python. So Python is a programming language that I bumped into in 2002, 2003. Before that, I had only coded in Microsoft-based languages, Visual Basic, being primarily the one, and then for a bit in Java. But then I looked at Python and I really fell in love with how the language was designed, and it felt very much like home because I was a basic developer also, and there are no brackets in basic. I don't know if
no, I have
inside
coded in Python.
You have coded in Python, right?
Yeah.
So most C-based languages like Java, they have braces, right? And then
Python has indentation.
Yeah. So Python is more indentation based. So I really liked Python as a programming language, and that's how I discovered open source. I realized Python is free, and the people who and it had everything that Microsoft Visual Basic had to offer at that time, or Java had to offer, more or less. And for me, that became the entry into open source world. And so when I started writing my own uh, ERP software, the default thing for me was to make it open source. Maybe deep inside there was this vision to build something long lasting. So I discovered open source through Python, and then when I started writing my own software, it just made sense to me for many reasons that it should also be open source.
So everything you built from then forward was open source, or at least you tried to make it open source.
Correct. So we had put the ERPNext code online on Google Code. There was no GitHub back then. Now GitHub is the platform for sharing code, but that was Google Code back then in 2008. And obviously, there are hundreds of millions of repositories out there, everybody pushing code open source. So nobody cares, right? We push some code out there. So for a long time, nobody cared that, our code was out there. But then slowly, very organically, people started, looking at it. And I don't even remember if there was an inflection point after which people started, but we started a mailing list. So anybody who had questions could come on a Google Groups mailing list back then. And ask questions. And that's how it started. With I don't even remember who's the first person who probably looked at the code, but yeah.
This podcast mainly caters to young people, so I want to ask some questions based on their perspective. My first encounter with the word open source, I think, happened like 3 years ago. And the only thing that I have really done in open source is maybe collaborate on the code with a few friends and contribute to some repositories here and there, but nothing significant. And I realized that a lot of people who are our age, and especially people who belong to tier 2, tier 3 cities, not a lot of them have this habit of pushing code to GitHub or GitLab. And it's still not a widely used practice. So how do you suggest somebody to get started with open source in the first place? And why is it even important for them?
For most part, you shouldn't contribute to open source, right? Because you should use it because it's free. And that's the primary thing, right? First, you become a user of a software you probably need. So if you need a software and say you use Mozilla Firefox maybe or something like that, right? Which is sadly few people are using Mozilla, but if you're pushing to say Firefox and then you find an issue with Firefox, you go to the Mozilla website. I think they have a website called Bugzilla where you can go and report a bug, right? So the first step is, if you have to use a software, try and use something open source. If you're using a software to edit your podcast, just try and use an open source software versus a proprietary one. And that's the first step. And once you start using the software, you may encounter certain issues. So you probably go and report bugs there. You'll go online and say, I can't do this kind of action. Maybe somebody suggested a workaround. Maybe somebody suggested a plugin. And then maybe, you find your own workaround. If I do this, then, I can get this thing done. And then you share your workaround either on an online community or wherever, right? On Stack Overflow or Reddit or wherever, right? These, the people are asking the questions. And once you go past that stage, maybe you find a real bug in the software, right? If your software is being used by millions of people, very likely that there are bugs that are not reported. So you go to a bug issue tracker either on GitHub or wherever the project is hosting their issue tracker, and then you go and first find whether that bug is already being reported. If it's already reported, then you can put a thumbs up, or if there is any missing information that you may not have, you can add that on that thread of that bug itself. If you find your bug is truly unique and hasn't been reported, you can file a new bug, right? And when you file a bug, you should be very careful about reproducing the exact steps you got to to encounter that bug, so that the developers can actually go and fix it. Now, if you're cross that stage and you really need this feature, right? Or you need this bug fixed, you can dive into the code, right? Because now the code is for you to really fix for yourself, right? So maybe you're using some podcast editing software and you need a new filter, and that filter doesn't exist. You can maybe figure out how the filters are coded, and then code your own filter and then use it for yourself. And if you're happy with what you used, then you would naturally feel that, oh, maybe other people can also use this filter, right? I mean, the filter I've created. And then you can go to that repository and then contribute it back. There is nothing like you should contribute, right? I mean, if you find a problem and you are able to fix it in a good way, then you go and contribute.
The idea is not to force yourself to contribute.
Correct. And unfortunately, a lot of this advice gets given to people, especially young people, right? Go and contribute to open source. No, you shouldn't do that. I mean, make your own repositories. I mean, that's much easier, because another very important thing is when you're a beginner, your code quality probably, right? I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions. I'm not talking about exceptions, but your code quality is probably not world class. And, your contribution is not going to be accepted. So today we run an open source project. I mean, we don't look at contributions are not always welcome, because we don't know the quality of the fix being applied, right? And a lot of times, like, people just apply a fix and then go away, right? Then they are not taking responsibility of owning the fix, or they may say you, in the example that we were doing, say you have your filter, you give it, right? It doesn't work in certain cases. Now you don't care, right? Because it worked for your case, you are done with it, right? I mean, and then somebody else is going to say, oh, but it doesn't work in this case, or it crashes my software every time I use it, or something like that.
Mhm.
Now it's the maintainer's headache. Now, okay, now somebody contributed this filter, but it's not working for us. Now I need to go dig deep into this extra feature and figure it out. So your code quality probably won't be world class to be able to contribute. So until you hit that point, you should probably learn from it, right? I mean, there is so much to learn from open source software.
Mhm.
And if you're willing to showcase your skills, make your own project and post it, right? You don't need to always go and contribute to somebody else's project. Like, make your own side project and post it also.
Widely given advice is that contribute to open source, and a lot of people give this tell people to just fix readmes, which then ends up in spam. So you're suggesting not to do that, and if you want to delve into open source, maybe become a maintainer, just create your own repository.
It's very hard to become a maintainer. I mean, this is like, to become a maintainer,
it doesn't have to be a huge repository, right? Even if it's a small project that you're working on, you can still be called a maintainer or not.
I mean, to be a maintainer in a popular project is like an Olympic level achievement. Let's be very clear about it. It's not for everybody, right?
Mhm.
I mean, getting a code contribution in a popular project, say like Python or whatever, right? It's extremely hard.
Yeah.
And to become a maintainer, I mean, it takes years of effort, right? Because before somebody is going to include you in this inner circle of people who can now be trusted to, own the entire repository for a bit.
Mhm.
So becoming a software maintainer in a popular open source project is, like I said, an Olympic level achievement. It's extremely hard. It takes years of effort to reach that kind of expertise and depth to become a maintainer. And one-time fixes are, you're creating more noise for the real maintainers now, who have to now look at all these typos and readme updates that students are sending just so that they can get some check mark on their resume, right? So it's definitely counterproductive, and I think a lot of people do get annoyed. On a lot of these forums, you see people ranting about students going and just adding a readme. So never do that. I mean, that doesn't really work.
So what's the right way to contribute to open source? I get it what you said. You should, only when it's necessary, you should contribute. But a lot of people, as you said, are trying to get resume points. So how to leverage open source to get those resume points?
You should never do that, right? That question itself is framed in a way that, you cannot leverage open source to get resume points. That's like a very, that's the wrong intent. The intent should be to help somebody, not to get resume points. Like, if you get resume points in the bargain, fair enough. I mean, what the whole idea of open source is, it starts with this idea of scratch your own itch.
Mm-hmm.
Find a problem that you want to solve. And then you will go deeper and deeper into that problem. And then maybe you come to a point where you can help somebody else. Either doesn't have to be a code fix, but just could be an answer on the forum saying, okay, maybe I tried doing these steps and this worked for me. Don't go for resume points. The companies that are hiring based of your contributions are probably companies you shouldn't work for, because they don't know anything. Like, the companies who are really good, they know what a good contribution is, right? They're not going to go for your, and then, all these t-shirts that you're getting, for, Hacktoberfest and all these things are, I think those have kind of now reduced, because now there is a special tag that maintainers need to add. Only then they are accepting Hacktoberfest requests. But in general, yeah, I mean, do something for learning, scratch your own itch, and, go deep, learn, and, figure it out. I mean, don't do anything just for the outcome or resume or career.
But do you suggest people to participate in Hacktoberfest, let's say?
I don't think it makes a difference. I don't think maybe it helps you to get introduced to a world out there of learning where, if you are a software programmer, I mean, you can see the best work in front of you, right? I mean, maybe if it introduces you to the idea of open source software, it's probably reasonable. But I mean, it's good for people to realize that there is a world of software out there that is for everybody to study.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know the four fundamental freedoms of free software, there is freedom to use, the freedom to study, the freedom to modify, and the freedom to redistribute, right? These are the four fundamental freedoms you have. And the idea behind these is, I mean, software runs most of our lives today, right? I mean, everything we do is run by software, and it's very important we understand that software, right? Because our lives depend on it. So that is the idea of freedom in software, that, you should have the freedom to study the software that runs your life in some ways. Somebody should have the freedom. I mean, not everybody is going to look into it, but whoever wants to look into it, like, should have the freedom to go and look how this actually works. And then, then you have the freedom to use, freedom to study, freedom to modify. That if you find something that doesn't work for you, maybe, change the software a bit so that it works for you, right? And then redistribute the software to others, right? So that is the foundation, the ideological foundation of open source is this idea of free software, which people don't talk about a lot right now. That's why in FOSS United, we call it free and open source software. So there is also this part of free software, which is the more ideological basis of open source, if you can call it.
I want to dive more into that, but I will do that later. Before that, as you said, any good company which knows open source would not correlate open source contributions to resume points. So I'm sure you've been in the hiring market. So what do you look for while you're hiring for a developer, let's say?
So I have probably taken at least 500 interviews in my career, or even more, right? And usually the interview ends in a minute, right? And then the rest of it is career advice. And I mean, the most easiest career advice I give is people have watched the Indian Idol show, right? I mean, where, there are these contestants who come and, they think they can sing, but, like, everybody knows they can't sing, right? And this is usually what happens when you take interviews of a lot of freshers, right? I mean, you instantly know, like, they're pretending they're good coders, but they're not really good coders. And I ask the question, I just tell them, like, who do you think gets selected, in these Indian Idol trials? And the people who do the riyaz, right? I mean, they are the people who get selected, not people who think they can sing. So do the practice, do the riyaz, become a good coder, so that you can work in a good company, right? And that shows in your work, shows, I mean, we have a hiring test where we ask engineers to make a simple application. And then, we ask them to change a few things in office, because, people also cheat that, they ask their friends to do that. So that also happens. We've gone through all the cycles. And so it's very easy, right? I mean, it's that easy, like, for somebody to, like, it takes a minute for somebody to evaluate whether you're a good coder or not. It's just how easy it is for you to evaluate during those Indian Idol trials that, are you a good singer or not, right? I mean, so do practice, right? I mean, there is no shortcut to success. I mean, you can watch, n number of, career advice on YouTube, but you're not going to get around the idea of practice, because that's the key, right? I mean, unless you practice, you're not going to get good at anything.
So I'm just going to talk about the fluff that I've seen on social media about open source and the limited knowledge that I have about it. And this one notion that's out there is that once you, like, get into open source, contribute heavily, you can make a lot of money through direct or indirect ways, right? How true is that?
So software is the gold rush of our times. This is what I said, right? I mean, typically you say, if you want to get rich, either, become a criminal or a politician, right? But I mean, we have seen so many startup founders become rich, right? I mean, we celebrate, billionaires and, all these unicorns and, unicorns are struggling right now, but the whole idea for people is somehow I want to become rich, right?
Mhm.
And for people to realize, and I think people will realize, I think we are going through this phase where we think anything that we want to achieve is only one arm's length away and we can grasp it. No, you want to become rich? Okay, thoda sa dur hai, That's not reality, right? I mean, we'll get over this phase because of media and because of the social media and so many people sharing their stories. It feels अरे तो billionaire बनना बहुत easy काम है. It's not. That's never really easy, right? Making money is hard, right? And software, probably it's ending, probably it's not, but it is the gold rush of our times, right? I don't know if you know the story of the original gold rush. Term comes from this idea that when in United States they discovered gold in California, and everybody then rushed to California to mine gold, right? So there is always a gold rush, and ever since I think Bill Gates became a multi-billionaire. I think this whole idea that if you want to be rich fast, software is one industry you should be in, right? I mean, that is probably still true. Maybe we are towards the fag end of this cycle, and software engineers do get a lot of pay. I mean, entry level pays in software are probably higher than any other industry, and a lot of it is because software in India can be instantly shipped to the US, right? So hiring an engineer in India versus hiring an engineer in the US, the cost arbitrage is so clear. You end up paying at least 1 crore for hiring an engineer in the US versus you pay somebody 20 lakhs in India. It's like still 80% discount, right?
Yeah.
And 20 lakhs in India is like huge salary. So this idea that everybody wants to become a software engineer, the underlying phenomenon is this industry itself, which keeps on creating these opportunities to create disproportionate wealth in a very short amount of time. So coming back to your question that open source करने से बहुत पैसा मिलेगा is basically the idea that how do I get attracted by recruiters in the IT industry, and open source is a way to stand out. I mean, maybe that's a meme, right? I mean, the other thing about our times is somebody says something, second person says the same thing, third person, and it's a meme, and everybody believes, okay, this is the truth. Yeah. That's not the truth. Like nobody gets big salaries because they contribute in open source, right? That's just a that's just a myth that's or a meme that's going around that you contribute to open source and you get a big salary. So that's not going to happen. In software, that's probably true, right? My wife is a college professor, and she looks at her salaries and she says like, this is not even fair, right? I mean, college professors get paid shit, right? And then software engineers right out of college get paid 20 lakhs. So it's just imbalance in society right now, and that's how things move. Because I mean, as long as you're getting these incomes, yes, young people are going to flock into the industry because money is a measure of where the demand is.
Rushabh, is it true that there comes an expectation of open source softwares to be free?
So there is this idea of free and open source that we talked about, right? Which is meaning that the software is free to use. So that is essentially the part of most open source softwares is that they are free to use. But the term open source is kind of does not give the full weight of free software because the word free is omitted first. So there is some expectation that users are expected to pay something for those software, and that's why there is always a ideological debate in the community between people who are hardcore supporters of free software versus open source software. And while the supporters of free software keep reducing every year, I mean, the general, at least at FOSS United, our position is we are open for all kind of ideological positions. Like we truly believe in free software. As FOSS United, as Frappe, we believe in free software, and we also understand that people who give software for free also need to sustain themselves, and then they have some right to livelihood. So yeah, that conflict is very much there in the whole open source community.
So you've been working on Frappe for the last 16 years. And so how do you create a profitable business when you're trying to create an open source and free software?
So it is very counterintuitive. I mean, mostly people don't do that. I mean, for many years, there was only one company that actually made money by giving away software free. That was Red Hat. And a lot of companies had tried and failed.
How did Red Hat make money?
So you must have heard of Red Hat Linux, right? So what they did is they gave binary packages they compiled Linux distributions into some, and they had certain binary packages which they offered to their enterprise customers, and they offered warranties on top of it. So they did not actually change any software. Like the software they were giving was freely available, but they bundled their warranties with their binary builds.
Okay.
And that was their initial system, because a lot of companies again want to use free software, but they want to hold somebody responsible for it also. So when you understand how big companies work, like in big companies, nobody does any work, first. And they just want some vendor to work, right? So if you are a big company and you're hosting a podcast, we'll just get a vendor to get it done, right? And so big companies will use open source software, but they need somebody to hold accountable, responsible for that software. So there is an opportunity for companies who can give warranties on free software to large companies. So that market was existing and Red Hat captured it. There were a few other companies, but none of them could survive along. So essentially they made money by offering warranties on Linux to large companies.
So how does Frappe make money?
Basically, it's not generally, like I was saying, it's not very common for companies that give out software free to make money except Red Hat, but there are a few other exceptions. It has taken us a very long time to reach a state where we are profitable. We've always been bootstrap profitable, like baseline, I would say not profitable, but break even for all these years. And so it's a struggle, because when you're giving away your software for free, like you would guess, who would pay for your software, right? When it's already free. And what we do is we offer support, we offer hosting, and we offer other services around our software, which is mostly ERPNext. Initially, we started with offering support for those who want paid support can come to us. Then we realized that as our software got better, people didn't need support because the software was good enough. And there were other smaller companies that were offering support at much cheaper prices than what we used to do. And we realized that wasn't a very sustainable strategy for us. So we switched to a hosting model recently. So now we have something we call it as Frappe Cloud, which is essentially where if you want to host any of our applications like ERPNext, you would go and host on our cloud. So that's how we make money on the software.
And you also have a freemium model right now?
It's free, right? For those who want to host themselves, which is majority of our users, they host it on themselves. And so it's 100% free for them.
Okay.
And those who just want hassle-free hosting, especially smaller companies who want hassle-free hosting from the OEM, then come to us. The hosting is also very low-cost, affordable kind of hosting model that we offer to our customers. And that's how we are sustainable and growing.
If it's so difficult to create a profitable business and counterintuitive to create a profitable business out of an open source software, why should anybody do it unless they are extremely passionate about open source and they know for sure that they want to create a business in that only? But if they don't,
like you said, no, it's very hard. And last 2 years, 3 years, I think there is a thesis in the VC market that open source is a way of distributing software. So what happens is once there is an industry where there is proprietary software and there is free software, like whenever there is free, like people will start switching to the free software. And then you can then use your brand to offer services like hosting and other ancillary services, right? So MongoDB is a very popular database which started as an open source software, but then they set up their own hosting service called MongoDB Atlas, and that's a multi-billion-dollar business now. And there's something called Elasticsearch, which also started as an open source project, and then they have their Elasticsearch hosting service, where they make money. So there is a thesis around VCs that if your software becomes immensely popular, like you can offer hosting or some other proprietary services around your software. And a lot of these softwares are now, unfortunately, in the pressure of making money, they are going back on their open source promise as well. Like MongoDB, Elastic, they have all kind of changed their licenses to something where it is free for personal use, but not free for commercial use. So they are also kind of restricting the way they use the software so that they can make money.
Okay.
So the benefit it gives you from a pure commercial standpoint, it gives you distribution. Because if your software is free, then people are going to talk about it. And there's going to be a lot of word of mouth, and developers are going to directly download and install your software. Typically, when you buy software, you have to go to procurement, right? You have to go through your budgeting office and say that, I need to buy this software, please approve my budget. Then, somebody approves your budget, and then somebody else checks, is this software compatible with our stack? There are 100 questions you ask before you can buy some software. But if it's free, download it, use it. Nobody asks. So that's a great way of entering. If you're selling software, it's a great way of entering a client's base. But then obviously if they're coming for free, then they might as well continue using for free.
So that creates automatically creates a community around the product when it's open source.
Correct. So it creates this, it creates a distribution first that people use it. And then, yes, there is a community because now, say for ERPNext, there are a bunch of small companies using ERPNext. They can go to their local software vendor with whom they're already buying and say, hey, the ERPNext thing looks free and we're using it. Can you help us maintain it, right? So then it creates an ecosystem first of independent people who then support these open source software, and that ecosystem essentially becomes your community. Community is essentially two parts. One is developers who use it, and say there are developers in a lot of large companies who use open source software, and they all benefit by helping each other, right? I mean, that's one community, and the other is the ecosystem where they support other companies to use open source.
Right. So there are majorly two sort of communities. One that is built around a product. Let's say if there's a community around ERPNext or Frappe, and there's another sort of community which is around FOSS United. So it's FOSS United, as far as I understand, it's a platform for people who are enthusiastic about open source to come and collaborate with each other, right?
Yeah, broadly.
Yeah, and you have hackathons as well. Yeah. But that sort of community is different from what you have around Frappe and ERPNext.
Correct.
So what is that one thing that you do to create engaged communities, be it in any sort of genre?
I've said this before that the only way to build a community is to give something for free, right? I mean, that's the starting point. Like whenever there is something free, you get a community. I mean, this is why temples give out free food, right? Because you want people to come and build a community. And so this is the same with software, right? I mean, you give free software, so people are going to use your software. So somehow they now feel that you have created some value for them, right? And somehow, and it is very much in human nature to reciprocate. That when you receive value from somebody, you want to kind of give back also in some ways. Then that forms the community around the product. So that is the product-driven community. And in any, like your question on engaged communities, right? I mean, as long as people are getting more value than they are giving, then you have an engaged community.
But there should be a way for them to give value as well, right? Because I think that creates a sense of belongingness.
Exactly. So it has to be give and take. It cannot be only take, because if it's only take, then that also doesn't work.
The people will get bored, and
in some ways, that's never true actually. I mean, even if you are in places, like they say about Facebook and social media is, if it's free, then you are the product, right? I mean, somehow things get balanced, right? In some karmic sense, they get balanced out where, if you're just taking stuff for free and not giving back,
then you are giving something without knowing it.
You are giving something. You will tell 10 people about it, right? I mean, so because you felt so good about that place, that experience, that you now want to share to 10 people.
Yeah.
So that itself is, creating the value. And out of those, some people might go and actually buy stuff from there, right? So I don't believe that, if people have gotten true value, they will give it back. That's what I believe.
Yeah, you don't have to make effort to get value from them. You just have to give out value.
Correct.
That's brilliant. And right now, even the proprietary startups, they're trying to build communities around the product, again, to create distribution.
Yeah.
So how do you think, since you have worked so extensively with communities, what do you think about communities that are built around proprietary software? And how because their product is not free,
correct,
let's say, and they are not giving anything for free, which is the formula to create communities. How do they create successful communities?
They do end up giving something free, like t-shirts, right? I mean, a lot of, if you go to job fairs or you go to these exhibitions, right, you get a lot of these free t-shirts and all. I mean, the idea is like, somehow those t-shirts and all create this kind of goodwill. So I like 37 Signals. I don't know if you would have heard, or your audience would have heard of 37 Signals. It's a great company. I think they do the best content marketing ever, after Apple maybe. And they have this quote. So Jason Fried, who is one of the founders, he's saying, like, if you can't outspend your competition, then out-teach your competition, right? So you can teach. I mean, teaching is something you can create value, and the idea is to genuinely teach somebody something and then create a value. That's all. I mean, in anybody's entrepreneurial journey as a company, there is so much knowledge we have within ourselves that if you can teach people, then that creates value.
So Rushabh, Frappe started more than a decade ago, right? And so what do you do at Frappe, and why did you start it? How did it come about to be?
So I joined my family business, like I said in the initial part, where they were struggling from an ERP implementation, and then I started building my own ERP because I was a hobbyist programmer. And then I enjoyed programming, right? That's why I did. I didn't have any idea about running a company or all of that. I said, if you want to do something for life, you should better do something you enjoy, right? And that became the profession also. In software, there are two types of companies broadly: service companies and product companies. Like product companies are very rare, especially in India. Like there are a lot of service companies. Right? Most Indian software companies, 95%, I would say, are software service companies. Doing business in India is extremely hard, especially if you are a small business, because India is a very cost-sensitive market. People don't want to pay for services. They last day tak, they'll stop your payment and all of that, right? And then I realized I don't want to do this, right? So once I was called for a meeting, and they'd given me a time, and for 2 hours they made me wait outside, and that was like a turning point for me. And it's like, I will stop selling services. I'll sell a product. If they want to buy it, they pay for it or nothing. Simple. I don't want to like go and become a salesman, because India, people don't respect small businesses especially, right? I mean, if you're selling very high-end luxury stuff, obviously they respect you. But if you're a small business trying to sell something, you don't get a lot of respect. So since I was more of a tinkerer, kind of a creator rather than a business person, I enjoyed creating products, and that's how we started with ERP being the first opportunity to build a product I had some need for. Yeah, that's how it started. We also built a web framework. We call it Frappe framework, which is in 2006. Web was very new. In fact, I started writing code in 2005, and I think this is 2004. Gmail was there, and there was no Facebook in 2005 as well. So web applications were very new back then, and JavaScript-based web applications that we see so commonly now were extremely new. Gmail was the only such application I'd seen, and there was no web framework that kind of did that. So I built my own web framework that we still continue to use after 15 plus years. And yeah, that's how the journey started. No idea of how to do business, no idea of how to get customers, how to build a stable line of income. So all that came much later. First thing was, okay, I know how to make a product. Let me make a product.
Okay, you were sure you don't want to do services.
Yeah, that was sure. I didn't want to do services.
Right. You also call Frappe a democratic company, a democratic business. What does that mean?
So there is another side story here quickly, is that we also run a school, and it's a 5-year school. It's a democratic school, so it means that all the children and the adults in the school have equal rights. So even the children have a right to vote in the way the school is run, right? Which is typically which is almost non-existent in most mainstream schools, that children even have a say in how things are done. And that works beautifully well. I mean, that itself is a topic of several podcasts, so I won't go into that. But I saw the idea of democracy working in a school so well, and I said, like, why are workplaces organized like military organizations, right? Our idea of organizations essentially comes from military, right? Where there is like a top-down hierarchy, right? Somebody is a boss, and then they report, and there's the reporting structure. I mean, I think we still call it reporting structure, right? And organizations, if you think, haven't changed in a lot of decades, right? I mean, they are still pretty much structured like militaries. Then this question, like, why can't organizations become democratic? And that's when, post-pandemic, what happened is, during the pandemic, is that all of us became remote. We were a team of 60, 70 people that suddenly went remote, and we had no idea who's doing what. And just randomly, we started voting on every decision in our Telegram channel, internal channel. And that, plus the whole idea of democratic schooling, really fused in my head, saying that, can a company be run democratically? So when you say democratic, it means that one person, one vote, like everybody in the organization, even if they have joined, even freshers who have joined like one day, have equal rights as somebody who's been around for 15 years. Yeah,
but I think that's difficult to do in a company of, let's say, you are around 70 people right now. And basically, when you say democratic, you mean non-hierarchical in a way.
So there are flat organizations, But flat organizations, again, how do you take decisions, right? I mean, that is where it all comes.
That's where I was going to come.
Yeah. So in flat organizations, if you don't have a decision-making model, then there is some quasi-hierarchy because somebody takes the calls, right? I mean, somebody takes decision. What democracy means is that there is a vote. There is an explicit process to take a decision, that any decision will be first discussed and then put to vote. So, so a lot of these things, a lot of the things we do in Frappe, so anything that, so if you think that democracy means a lot of discussions and time wasting, that doesn't happen, because if it affects only you, then you don't need to ask anybody.
Yeah.
If it affects you and a colleague, both of you can sit and decide what you want to do, right? You don't need to ask a third person. Only if it affects the entire company, like things like what is a pay policy or something like that, right? Those things go on a global vote. So it's not that many things that that get controlled by the entire team. And then we also have something we call as pick your own pay. I think we are the only company in India probably that does it. Is that every employee in the company picks their own pay. Like, you just say that this is the pay I want. Yes, that's how
does that work? Like,
so the idea originally comes from this guy called Ricardo Semler. He runs a company in Brazil. He's written a book called Maverick. And so the idea is that when you say you are truly flat, then somebody sets the pay, right? I mean, there are two leverages where people have control over the team. One is when they set the pay, and when you fire people or hire and fire, right? Those are the hard leverages. Other than that, okay, you can influence people by telling them. I mean, if you are in a hierarchical company, you probably listen to your manager mostly because they set your pay, right? I mean, they're going to decide what you're going to get appraisal next year, right? So you be nice to your manager or whoever. And when you take away that right, then you get even a flatter organization. I mean, that's the idea. And there are several other ideas, is that people know their work better than anybody else's work. Say, if we are working in one company, I know my work better because I live my work, right? I mean, even though I may be working with you, I really don't know what you're working on at the depth at which you know yourself.
Yeah.
So that is the second one. And then it is pick your own pay, but it is not free lunch. It's not that you can go and take a pay and then not contribute. I mean, the basic understanding in a team is that you contribute more than your pay. I mean, like a community, right? I mean, it should be a win-win. As a person, part of a community, you should get more, and the community should get more from you also, right? I mean, it has to be that kind of win-win situation. So it is very counterintuitive, but it beautifully works. We've been doing it for 3 years now. First year was moderated pick your own pay, where everybody proposed, but there was a moderation committee that did some haircut, for people who were too high or too low. Then last 2 years we have had unmoderated. And so yeah, as you expect, in the first year there was a 62% pay hike, because everybody thought, and then all our books are transparent, right? So this comes with the idea that all our books of accounts are transparent, and even that before that we had pay transparency, which again I think less than 0.5% of companies in India would be having pay transparency. It's like when you announce pay, you don't individually tell people their pay. You just go and share a spreadsheet with, this is
so everybody knows how much everybody else is getting paid.
Yes. So that is pay transparency. No, we've gone one step beyond, right? Where everybody even sets their own pay.
So let's say an employee asks you for, let's say, 30 lakhs, and you realize that the contribution that they're making is not worth that much money. Then what do you do in that case? Do you come to a conclusion, talk about it?
So generally, typically we say 6 months is what you get to prove yourself, and
you agree on that number.
Yeah, I mean, see, people are not really stupid also, right? I mean, see, there are two types. I think there are people who want that number and then they will quit your organization. And somehow I'm happy they're gone, because okay, they just wanted a higher pay and then now they don't want to live up that way. Like people who are in it for the long run, say those who want to work at Frappe for 5 years or whatever, they know that taking a very high pay this year is not going to increase my chances of staying for a long term. So people who think long term are usually quite genuine about what they ask. I mean, that is what you should believe. And people who do take a short term hike, in the first year, like I said, we had a lot of people were, and they left on their own. I mean, I would say 70 to 80% realized they've taken too much hike, and then they decided to move out into different jobs, which anyways in a company, you don't want people who are only here for a short term. So even though we paid maybe salaries for a few months, I mean, in the end, we are better off with, the people who really believe in the company.
Well, you said this is post-pandemic that you started doing this. So how did the managers, stakeholders take this change? Because now they have to be democratic. They have to let other people in and get votes from them. So how did they take that change?
That's a good question because they are no longer there. And because basically most of the lateral hires who came in Frappe didn't stick around because of this reason that, they have been used to, like, if you are a senior person in company A and then you join a company like Frappe, then you have completely lost all your toolkit, right? Because your toolkit is essentially how to motivate, if not manipulate, people to getting work done, right? I mean, and somehow that toolkit is useless now because in Frappe, nobody's going to listen to you because, okay, so there is pick your own pay and there's pick your own work as well. So I can even say that, even though I joined as an engineer, I want to do sales, for example. Or, I joined as sales, now I want to do product, whatever. But then you have to contribute, right? I mean, that is the idea. So if you're a manager and, you lose that leverage instantly of, assigning work to other people, that doesn't work. So if you come up with an idea, you must have a lot of social capital first. First, you have to build social capital in the team that, your ideas get traction. And then you want to convince like other people to follow your idea. They have to be truly convinced.
Right.
They can't just work because, they are telling you to, just because you tell them to work, right?
Yeah.
So the idea again, so there is a whole set of values that make this happen is intrinsic motivation. So you can't force motivation on somebody else from outside, ki boss ye kaam karo, right? Because that doesn't work. I mean,
that works negatively. In fact, it creates a lot of negative politics in the workplace. And
I mean, that's most workplaces, work that way. And when we discovered this model, right? I mean, like we are like, it works so beautifully well. I mean, it's a surprise. Like nobody believed, even in our team, a lot of people didn't believe that this can work. I mean, there were like fierce debates even within the team on pick your own pay. Like some people were vehemently opposed to pick your own pay. And then when we ask people like, why are you opposed? Like, do you think you will select a wrong pay? And they said, no, we will select the right way. But you believe other people will select a wrong pay, right? So this whole idea that I am somehow good, but everybody else is evil. And you ask that question of maybe everybody else is like that. No, everybody else will select a fair pay.
So do you have managers at all?
So we don't have managers. We do see some people do end up managing at some points, but they do it with consent. I mean, there are some teams that work closely. There are some people that work as individual contributors. A lot of people work as individual contributors. Some people work closely at teams. Some people have multiple mentors. So the term manager, leader, mentor is interchangeably used in Frappe. So
a typical team that you have in your company, they are mostly not mediated by anybody, or is it?
There is a situational leader for everything. For example, if there is engineering, right? There is somebody who's really good at engineering practices, for example, that person becomes the to-go person for any problem related to engineering practices. Somebody is very good at architecture. So if anybody has a question on architecture, that person gets, somebody is good at UI and design. Somebody is good at, whatever, right? So there is no, like, the designated leaders, even though we do have titles because titles anyways, titles are also picked by everybody.
Yeah.
But in teams, there are several leaders who show up based on what the context is.
So you said mostly people are individual contributors, and it takes a lot for somebody to be efficient while being an individual contributor, but not having a manager. It takes a lot of accountability. So what do you look for when you hire for your company? Because it's a very different model that you work on.
Correct. So when we don't have any special model we used to hire. I mean, we mostly work with freshers, like I said, very hard for people who have worked in other cultures to come and somehow suddenly be operating. I mean, there are exceptions for sure, but I mean, the rule is generally people who have worked in other companies find it harder. Mm-hmm. So we mostly hire freshers. Freshers are very moldable. They don't come with a lot of the baggage that people who have worked in other companies for a significant period of time. I think under 5 years is still reasonable. I think people are very moldable, but 5 plus, 10 plus extremely hard. Between 5 and 10 may be moldable, but 10 plus very hard to mold. But
what is it that you look for in them? They're freshers and they don't have a lot of experience working in other organizations, so they're not conditioned a certain way. But it's the reason other organizations work that way is because it's important for somebody to hold someone accountable for the work that they're doing.
Correct.
So since you are not doing that here, so you have to look for certain such character traits?
At some point, you're right. Some people want to be managed, right? And we can't weed out those people very clearly upfront. I mean, it's very hard for people to know whether they want to be managed or are they self-directed, when they join. But I think most freshers I've seen usually are comfortable. I think the reason people don't work out is they feel intimidated after joining the company. It's like, you are not, you're doing a task you're not prepared for, right?
You don't have a safety net.
Yeah, and you suddenly see a team which is extremely high performing, and you enter this team and thinking you may be able to perform, but within some few months you realize that that's not your level for whatever reason, right? I mean, if you're a tennis player or whatever, right? I mean, you go and play tennis with a really good player or something like that. You instantly know, okay, I'm not going to, like, this is like way above my league, right? I mean, I'm not. That's a reason where people don't work out. I don't think cultural reasons is why people don't work out. It's just that people who are not, in that high performing league somehow feel very, and it's a vicious cycle, because once you realize, oh, I'm in this company, and everybody loves, obviously, first losing your job is a big stigma, right? And you don't want to lose your job at any cost, right? And so people don't see in India, especially, moving on as a positive thing. It's always a negative thing, right? I mean, so that negative connotation about moving on is, people are very hesitant to move on. And yeah, so people don't work out because they are desperately trying to fit in, but they're not able to perform because of mostly skill levels, I would say.
So as long as they're high performing, they will be able to work.
As long as they have some skill, right? I mean, this is where we were tying into the earlier discussion, like, the Indian Idol thing, right? I mean, agar aapne riyaz kiya hai, then you don't have to worry about culture and all these things. They are all figure them out. Like, build a skill that you are really proud of, right? And then you compete on that skill, whatever that skill is. I think people don't realize that. I mean, the amount of effort it takes to get good at your game is something people always underestimate. People, especially who kind of struggle in early career.
So what's the best thing that's come out of this democratic model?
It's early days for us. It's 3 years into it. I think the best thing.
These 3 years compared to the last 3 years?
No, I think there is incredible output. I can clearly see. I think democratic and pick your own pay, I think, just change the whole vibe of the company, right? Because now everybody's so energized, and everybody is extremely making full use of their agency to get things done, because they somehow know that there is some so that has been a huge impact. And I think most people will not go back on this. That like, initially it was that, oh, is this a social experiment? Are we guinea pigs? I mean, like, why are you doing this? And now it's like nobody is willing to go back on these things, now. So that's a big win, I would say that.
But that's really interesting. This is the first time that I've heard about this. And as you said, I don't think a lot of people are doing this pick your own pay in India, or maybe even
pick your own pay in India. So I'm pretty sure nobody else does it. So I was invited to this talk by Semco Institute, which is the Ricardo Semler I talked about, right? They run this consultancy, and I was just talking to them. So yeah, very rare that companies in India are experimenting with how they run.
But do you think more companies should do it?
Makes sense to me. So we'll see.
Right.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense to everybody who hears about it, but I think people want.
It does make sense when people are really happy with what they're getting paid, and they want to live up to the money that they're getting, and ties up into a good culture. I have two last questions. So first being, why Mumbai? You've chosen Mumbai to build Frappe for the last 15 years. Why not Bangalore?
I'm born and bred Mumbai. So there is no.
Is that the only?
I was just telling a friend, Mumbai is a state of mind, right? I mean, it's not. I mean, it's obviously the city, and the culture is very different from every other city you go in, right? And it's where I am from. So,
do you think you miss out on something by not building in Bangalore?
Not at all. I mean, in a way, you are happy being away from the tech limelight as such, right?
You don't want to be in the tech limelight.
No, I mean, like, yeah, obviously, right? I mean, if you are focused on doing your work, you want as little distraction as possible, right? So that way it's good. And Mumbai has this kind of grit that is associated with the city, which is very down to earth, very real. Nothing is hidden in Mumbai, right? I mean, the city grabs you the moment you get out of the airport, right?
Yeah.
It's not unlike most cities that, like Bangalore, you go out of the airport and you feel, oh, you're in first world, right? Mumbai is like, the moment you land, you see the slums, right? It's a city that doesn't hide itself and it's very real. So yeah, I like Mumbai.
So Rushabh, this is the one question that I ask everybody who's on the pod.
Yeah.
What's the one advice if you could give to a 20-year-old? It could be about anything.
So one advice I give to my kids, and I think that's the only advice. So on advice, like I said, right? The quote that I always think of is, please take my advice because I don't use it. But this is one advice I use, and is read books, right? That's like the easiest.
What's the best book you've read? So
read anything, right? Read anything you like. Read anything that gets your curiosity. I love reading fiction, but you could read whatever you want to read. Read non-fiction, read anything. But like books give you a gateway into the world. I don't think I think it's still unparalleled, like in spite of all the media additions that we have, but a deep dive a book gives you into anything is, it builds your mental stamina because you have to imagine things, right? Unlike a visual where, the imagination is already done for you.
Yeah.
Whereas a book forces you to imagine, and it forces you to, over 50,000 words, connect a story, right? And the kind of brain development it does. I think that's like the easiest thing anybody can do. And I find it so hard to give this advice to anybody because nobody follows it. So
yeah, everybody knows that they should be reading books, but the attention span just is too small.
Exactly. It builds your attention span. It builds your brain like nothing else.
Thank you so much, Rushabh. This is all I have.
Thanks.
Do you have any other ending closing notes?
No, this was fun. This was the first time I did like a podcast in a studio.
Yeah, I hope you liked it.
Yeah, it was fun.
Thank you so much for being here. You have been a delight to host. Thank you so much.
Same here.